Greetings, my name is Grace Joan Ravelis. I am a BSN student at Florida State College at Jacksonville, and I will be presenting my capstone project, Mental Health Care Needs for Military Veterans. Here are the contents. We'll be talking about the introduction, some mental health statistics, my PICOT, some literature review, bridging the gap, education plan, and evaluation. So since the attack on American soil on September 11, 2001, there's been a huge military effort in order to protect the home front. Three major operations were conducted in the Middle East: Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, and Operation Inherent Resolve. As many of these service members are separating from military service or getting ready to retire present day, a lot of them are struggling with the after effects of war, to include post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, traumatic brain injury related symptoms, depression, elevated risk of suicide, and substance abuse, a lot of which having to battle altogether is called the invisible enemy. Now, total service members involved in all of these operations is approximately 244,000. Now, within the VA system, of those 244,000, total enrolled receiving care is approximately around 48,733. So as you can see, there is a gap in as far as access to care, as far as those military service members involved in these in the effects of war. So some mental health statistics, again, as I mentioned, there are mental health needs of active duty service members that need to be addressed. Things like PTSD, depression, interpersonal conflict. That can also include different ways that the service members have conflicts, not only within themselves, but conflicts, everyday conflicts, whether it be work-related, family-related. Again, an elevated risk of harming him or herself or others, and substance abuse. And an interesting statistic here is that 14 to 16% of U.S. service members deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan have been diagnosed with PTSD or depression. Which brings up the question in my PICOT. In the military veteran patient population, how does proactive access to mental health treatments while active duty compared to starting treatments post-separation affect military veterans within the first 5 years after separating from the military? So some literature review. So there have been 2 articles that I was able to review pretty closely. There's one article labeled Veterans Transition Out of the Military and Knowledge of Mental Health Disorders. Some takeaways from that article is that there is indeed a high prevalence of mental health disorders among the veterans that transition out of the military, and that there is a growing awareness and there are available resources and support once they are separated from the military. Now, as far as availability, that seems to be the question. And also transitioning out of the military sometimes creates that barrier to care, that kind of in between, not necessarily knowing that you belong to a TRICARE network, not necessarily knowing whether you belong to the VA network, and kind of bridging that gap, because sometimes it's not well known as far as who to go to receive care. So there are those barriers. The second article is Trends and Risk Factors for Mental Health Diagnoses Among Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans Using the VA Affairs Healthcare. Again, there is a growing trend of mental health diagnosis in the VA system during the study period that focused between the years 2002 and 2008, which is the peak times of when these conflicts happened. What is interesting with this article is that mental health diagnoses also increased among veterans who did receive VA health care following the start of the war in Iraq. So even though these veterans were receiving VA health care, the prevalence of mental health diagnoses was still trending upwards, which creates this effect that even though that they're receiving this health care, their mental health needs aren't being addressed appropriately. Now, what are the ways to bridge this gap? There's this vast gap as far as mental health care needs among active duty and veterans, and having to make that transition of care more streamlined. There are several ways. Early detection. So early detection while active duty. Now that can be done during several assessments, first of which is a yearly physical health assessment, which is usually conducted on the service member's birth month. So for example, my birthday is in January, so every January it is a requirement for medical readiness for me to log in, complete a self-assessment survey. So they'll ask me, okay, the basic health questions like how much do I weigh? How often do I exercise? How often do I eat fruits and vegetables? Along with that, they'll also ask me as far as how am I doing as far as my stress levels at work? Am I getting enough sleep? How many days per week am I getting enough sleep? Do I ever feel feelings of hopelessness or despair? How many times per week? How many times do I ever feel like I need to do I ever feel like I need to harm myself, or do I ever feel like I'm at risk at harming others? Do I need to see a mental health provider? Things like that. And once those that self-assessment is done, there are things that get flagged, and then a provider will follow up and be able to ask those questions. Okay, I see here that you said in your survey that you do want to seek a mental health provider. Let's help you out with that. So that is one way. Pre-deployment health assessment and post-deployment health assessment. These are conducted within 60 days of leaving for deployment and 60 days returning home from deployment. And they're conducted in a similar fashion, sometimes just depending on the circumstances. These are done on paper assessments and read over, but essentially the same fashion, depending on the answers that you provide on those surveys. They'll be able to flag and follow up with a primary care provider who then can refer out to a mental health provider if needed. Now, bringing that access to care. So access to care is also very much important in bridging the gap. There's multiple ways of supporting via mental health. Within the Marine Corps, they do have these OSCAR teams within every Marine Corps unit. Stands for Operational Stress Control and Readiness. So it's a team of psychiatrists, psychologists, and behavioral health technicians who go around to the battalions within the units and say, hey, we're available for support. If you notice that any of your guys are having these signs of symptoms of mental health, refer them to us and we'd be able to help them out. Also, we do have mental health departments, also with the same type of personnel, psychiatrists, psychologists, BHTs, or behavioral health technicians that are able to help in the same fashion, but they are located within the military treatment facilities or hospitals. And I think this is one of the most important ways to bridge the gap as far as mental health is removing the stigma, which is still an ongoing process, especially within the military system. The triads or the top chain of command for every unit needs to be able to address mental health care needs as an essential way for maintaining a healthy, ready, reliable force. So not only does the force need to be physically ready or physically fit, but they also need to be mentally fit and capable as well. And again, senior enlisted and officers need to encourage their service members to seek support, knowing full well that these resources are available to them. And also, these supervisors, they're leaning towards focusing on building resilience, and these are done through workshops, support groups, especially during deployments, especially during combat deployments too, or post-combat deployments. And again, as far as an education plan, I do have this brochure that you can refer to that has important points that I've mentioned throughout my presentation. And then you'll also receive my evaluation form. If you can please fill that out and send it back to me, that would be greatly appreciated. And thank you so much for listening to my presentation. Hopefully you've gained some knowledge as far as accessing or increasing mental health care needs for military veterans. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I have my email address listed here. And thank you very much for your support.